Honourable members, God is good all the time. And all the time, and I must follow that up by saying, the devil is a liar. And so we are back on stream with good audio and good video. At this time, we are at the point of communications by the speaker. You know, last night I attended a service recognizing the Day of Atonement and Repentance at Bahama. And this morning during my devotion, I turned on the television and there was a live broadcast in Israel where thousands of persons were at the Wailing Wall in celebration of the Day of Atonement and Repentance. The celebration was Yom Kippur. I believe it is appropriate at this time, and I intend to make the following communication. First of all, I trust that you had an enjoyable summer recess and have returned to this honorable house to continue the people's business in an open, transparent, and accountable manner. The Bahamian people deserve no less. Honorable members, as we were about to commence this year's summer recess, I had pledged to remain as impartial as is humanly possible, and I intend to keep that promise. This should be the fundamental mindset of every member of Parliament. However, the way the Westminster model has been practiced in this country by successive administrations makes it very difficult for any speaker to adhere strictly to the doctrine of impartiality and neutrality. If we are sincere about the development of our democratic institutions, and if we wish all right-thinking Bahamians to take us seriously, we must pay more attention than lip service to the tenets. The Parliament and the Speaker must be given the right amount of independence to bolster the impartiality and neutrality required. Let us stop pretending that the office of the Speaker is an independent one. It is not. And if we continue to drift further and further in the direction of unilateralism, it will not be long before the governance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas become one ball of confusion. History is replete with examples of atrocities that have come about when power is concentrated either in one person or in one group of persons. It facilitates greed, corruption, and plunder. It gives you the inner city blues, and it makes you want to holler and throw up both your hands. But this is no time for hollering or throwing up both your hands. This is time to throw down the gauntlet and wage war against systems of oppression and subjugation. Absolute power and dictatorial control. Since the general elections of 2002, it has become obvious that the Bahamian people are searching for something that they have yet to find. It seems very obvious to me that the Bahamas is in transition towards democracy and people's power. The American Declaration of Independence states this: all experience has shown that mankind is disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. than to right themselves by abolishing the forms which they are accustomed. But those who bear rule in one-sided system soon lose touch, and suffering ceases to be tolerable. The British philosopher Thomas Hobbes, one of the founders of the modern political philosophy, postulated the condition of man is a condition of war, of everyone against everyone. Hobbes is best known for his influential formulation of the social contract theory. He concluded that men are brutish beasts, and that without laws, rules, regulations, and procedures, man will encroach upon the territories of other men. It is precisely because of past experiences that certain principles of democracy evolve. We must study this history so as to avoid the tragic mistakes of the past. Over the past decades, dating back to the 80s, when this chair was occupied by the late Sir Clifford Darling, the Bahamas witnessed the most vile encroachment by the executive branch of government into the territory of the legislative branch of government. This encroachment and resultant breach was wrong under the Penland administration, wrong under the Ingram administration, wrong during the Christie administration, and if perpetuated, it will be equally wrong under the Minnis administration. By now, you must be wondering if this is a statement of resignation. It is. After much soul searching and wide consultation, I am resigned to the fact that the Speaker must be lonely in his eminence. But despite the isolation, loneliness, and solitary confinement of the office, I accept and surrender to my calling. I want to assure the Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, and all members of Parliament that I do not want your jobs. And I doubt that you want mine. So this being the case, I give this notice and assurance that as long as I preside in this chair, I will endeavor to do my best to make sure that you do your jobs and only your jobs. I am the presiding officer, and I serve at your pleasure. I was elected by a unanimous vote when I entered this chair. Only a few months later, the official opposition withdrew that confidence in me. And now I move on a path where I risk the possibility of others removing their confidence in the Speaker. But as long as I am Speaker, I will not endorse the current impotency of the Parliament. I will discharge my duties in the manner required of me by the Constitution and the established rules and practices of the Chamber and procedure of Westminster. Honourable members, I published an article in the Nassau Guardian on the 4th of October 1994. The article was captioned, "Totalitarianism Guised in Democracy." I commend this article to you, honourable members, and you will see that my views on this matter are as a result of many years of analysis, research, and reflection. I did not recently arrive at this stance. Today, as on every other day, I'm expressing my personal conviction. This shall be my contribution to the development of the democratic institutions in the country. And I take my conviction very seriously. Accordingly, the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is challenged this day to enact law establishing an independent statutory Parliamentary Service Commission, one with specific administrative and budgetary control for the institution. In so doing, we can avoid the example that we just had here this morning. The Bahamas will join, in so doing, numerous member states of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, CPA, many of whom have already enacted this legislation. I believe in the unity of governance, but one must be able to see the necessity of plurality in the functions of government. Our Constitution clearly demarks three basic branches of power. This may surprise honourable members, but the Parliament is the first arm of government, and you can check that under Section 52, Article 52 of the Constitution. The executive and judicial branches, while equally important, are born out of this elected body of the Parliament. And this is as it should be. In this triune arrangement, the other two branches of power carry out their specific functions as Parliament carries out its functions, and are intended to bring about success and responsible governance. Westminster model is designed for success. I am reminded of a story in the Old Testament. Jethro gave some very interesting advice to his son-in-law Moses with respect to the separation and delegation of powers. I refer to it as the Jethro principle. English law was based on biblical principles. The British had major success from Bible principles, and the people ought to read the Bible. After all, the preamble of our Constitution establishes our nation on these same spiritual principles. No one of these three branches of power should ever encroach on the domain of any of the other two branches. This is unacceptable in the modern Bahamas. It is time to move beyond this. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas deserves better. The funeral of the late Chief Justice Stephen Isaacs was a very sad occasion for me. However, there were moments when I felt a joy that almost made me completely forget that I was attending a funeral. I must commend both Prime Minister Dr. the Honourable Hubert A. Minnis and the Venerable Bishop Drexel Gomez for their wonderful speech and sermon made in eulogizing the late Chief Justice. The Prime Minister's speech was sound in its tenets. I'm sure, as a result, the Prime Minister will not object to my quoting from his speech, which contains some profound utterances on democracy. The Prime Minister said this: "There is no genuine democracy without the rule of law. There is no genuine democracy without an unyielding respect for basic rights and freedoms. There is no genuine democracy without equal treat of all citizens before the law." The Prime Minister is absolutely correct. And I would add this: Westminster's system of democracy was designed for checks and balances. Each branch of power has its role to play in checking the other two branches. On the separation of powers, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Our democratic system is built on three pillars: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, which are necessarily connected but have separate and independent functions. Each branch has a role in promoting and safeguarding the rule of law and the dignity of human person through adherence to the rights and freedoms of the individual. Honourable members, the Prime Minister is absolutely correct. He obviously understands the system of governance under which he operates as Chief Executive. And so, Mr. Prime Minister, in future appointments of members of the Executive, please ensure that there are sufficient backbenches remaining so as to allow the Parliament to hold the government to account. With the exception of the House Rules and Business Committee, no member of the Cabinet should serve on any of the various parliamentary committees, and the Cabinet should divest itself of parliamentary functions, administrative or otherwise. This will lend itself to greater efficiency and the equality of treatment of all members of the institution. It will also bring about greater transparency and accountability. On the civic creed of a nation, the Prime Minister concluded, a true and vibrant civic creed resides in the temperament and spirit, the disposition, and in the hearts and minds of those who adjudicate the law. The occasion did not lend itself to an elaboration on this point, so the Prime Minister rightfully stopped where he did. But it is obvious to me from the proposed motions that we have coming before this House that he wishes to remedy the wrongs that exist in the Bahamas, particularly as we practice this Westminster model. Perhaps the best place to start is the total separation of the legislative branch from the executive branch. It is common knowledge that the continuing encroachment of the executive into the Parliament has effectively rendered the legislature impotent in its role as a check on the executive as envisaged by Article 72 of the Constitution. Constitutionally, the executive branch has general direction and control of the government. It is clear that this control was never intended to be absolute. While there exists a degree of fusion between the executive and legislative branches in both the Senate and the House of Assembly, the executive branch should have no specific role or function in the micromanagement of the day-to-day administrative and budgetary functions of the Parliament. On the contrary, the doctrine of the separation of powers and conventions of the Westminster model of government forbids such overreaching by any of the three branches into the sphere and influence of any of the other two branches, and deems any such action ultra-virus and absolute an abuse of power. In this vein, Bishop Gomez, in his sermon during the funeral service for the late Chief Justice, called for inclusion of all citizens to full participation in the affairs of state if we are to maximize our potential and advance as a unified nation. This inclusive participation of our citizens will exercise through their, it should be exercised through their representatives in Parliament. For decades now, this is not an indictment on the present government or executive, but for decades now, perhaps through lack of understanding, the executive has violated the spirit of Article 72 of the Constitution, which states, Article 72, subsection 1, there shall be a cabinet for the Bahamas, which shall have the general direction and control of the government of the Bahamas, and shall be collectively responsible thereof to Parliament. Article 72(2), the Cabinet shall consist of the Prime Minister and not less than 8 other ministers, of whom one shall be the Attorney General, as many as may be appointed in accordance with the provisions of Article 73 of this Constitution. And we note here that Article 72 is an entrenched provision, and to change Article 72 and establish an upper limit for the number of ministers, it requires a vote of not less than 3/4 of all members of both houses, and thereafter it requires a referendum with a majority vote of the electors. In the interest of transparency and accountability, this should be an amendment establishing an upper limit for the appointment of ministers to eliminate the supersized cabinets that we've seen over the past decades. I recommend that combined the size of the cabinet, inclusive of parliamentary secretaries, should not exceed a limit of 17 or 43% of the elected members of Parliament. As long as the status quo remains, it will demonstrate our lack of commitment to the ideals of accountability and transparency. In addition, I have noted with interest the tendency to think that the Cabinet Office, through the Attorney General, should be the sole legal advisor to the Parliament. I see this as an adulterous relationship that is forbidden by the very concept of the separation of powers and the tenets of Westminster. The Attorney General is a member and legal advisor to the executive branch of the government. In adherence to the doctrine of the separation of powers and the conventions of Westminster, the Attorney General cannot and must not directly be involved in the affairs of the legislature and the judicial branches of government. The British, confronted with this controversial overreaching tendency of Lord Chancellor Derry Irvine, remedied this problem in 2003 by removing the Lord Chancellor from office with a plan to abolish that office. Let me hasten to add right here that I am not suggesting that the Attorney General be removed or that his office be abolished. In this regard, according to my research, the plan to abolish the office was later abandoned, though it was partially reformed in the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005 in England, and is now used as a secondary title to the Secretary of State for Justice. In this vein, and in addition to any legal advice offered by the Crown, I have sought to find wisdom in many counsel by speaking with and receiving the agreement of the following eminent jurists to provide independent legal advice to the Speaker and the legislative branch of government. I've spoken with and received the agreement of Dame Joan Sawyer, former Chief Justice and President of the Court of Appeal; Attorney Fred Smith, QC; Attorney Maurice Glendon, QC; Attorney O.B. Ferguson Jr., President of the Trade Union Congress, and a recognized precedent-setting attorney before Her Majesty's Privy Council; Attorney Kelphine Cunningham, former Registrar General and Vice President of the Bahamas Industrial Tribunal; and Mr. Khalil Parker, the President of the Bahamas Bar Association. The Constitution, in Article 46(1), establishes a minimum of 38 members of Parliament, while Article 72 establishes a minimum of 8 ministers. And the question is, if that being the case, why over the years have we permitted this circumstance to occur? Why have we almost tripled the minimum number of cabinet ministers while we have only one seat above the constitutional minimum of 38? How can there be accountability and transparency when the cabinet outnumbers the backbench and the official opposition combined? Why would a House of 39 members have 20 elected members as cabinet ministers and parliamentary secretaries when the House of Commons, with 650 members, have under 30 cabinet ministers? Why is the cabinet office seized with the administrative and budgetary control of Parliament when the principles of Westminster absolutely condemns the idea of any individual or branch of government functioning in more than one branch of government simultaneously? Now, as a former chief meteorologist, I understand that the weather conditions can change as a consequence of certain circumstances. And I believe it will get cold soon. As a former meteorologist, you would then pardon me if I employ some of the language of the trade. I expect atmospheric conditions against this particular intervention to change. But before you make determinations as to what position you will take, I urge you, in the interest of this wonderful country that we all love, to please reflect deeply on what I have said today. My position is not mine alone. It is deeply rooted in the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy. And interestingly, it is deeply rooted in all established democracies. The Bahamas, as we've seen today earlier, have produced great Olympic champions competing on an even playing field with the greatest powers on earth. I have no doubt that we can govern our country with much democratic ideals as other nations on this earth. Having said that, I have and forecast colder days and a penetrating chill factor as I move on by faith in this path of impartiality and neutrality. But I understand, as a former chief meteorologist, that whether the weather be cold or whether the weather be hot, whether the weather be fine or whether the weather be not, we must weather the weather, whatever the weather, whether we like it or not. Prime Minister, in his tribute to the Chief Justice, Stephen Isaacs, has raised fundamental issues of democracy, the separation of governmental powers, and the independence of the three branches of government. The time is right at this time to ask the question whether the current state of affairs are reflective of the highest functioning of Westminster system of governance. If the answer is no, and I strongly suggest that it is no, then why be silent about it? We are honestly and sincerely about the advancement of this nation that we love and about the people that we represent, then I suggest that we need to holler but not throw up both our hands. It's time to recognize the reasons for the Ten Commandments and adhere to the postulations of Thomas Hobbes. Our refusal or failure to initiate this fundamental law to establish an independent parliamentary service commission will categorize us as pretenders, and our words will ring loud in hollow emptiness. Thank you, honorable members.